I think one of the things I noticed in the movie, and I think is a big point of the film, is the creativity or freedom that these great athletes had kind of led them to be as great as they are, and not the prototypical kind of beat your child into performance. It's more, Gretzky's dad, for instance, just here's a tennis ball, go play with that for a couple hours to figure out what you've got. And when he was with Edmonton, being behind the net was something no one was doing.
Yeah.
Would you say that creative nature is the most important element of why they became Gretzky or Rice?
I think so. I think that's the essence of greatness. The essence is when they were kids, basically, the experimentation and understanding yourself, your strengths and weaknesses, and trying things out and discovering kind of tricks and new ways of doing things. That's the only way to kind of, I think, be great, be the greatest of all time. If you're not experimenting and basically, doing it in an unstructured way, not drills, this with teams and this, if you're not doing that, then I don't think that you'll ever achieve kind of that level of success.
How hard was it to get them to be on camera, to get these names?
Yeah. It was one of the harder things about this project because, I knew that, people were only going to listen to the greatest of all time. They want to, you can't have people commenting about greatness or sort of, the second greatest or whatever. I knew that I had to get the greatest athletes of all time, and that's who people were going to listen to. And so, however long it was going to take, in this case, it took about a year to get all of them. And I basically interviewed them sporadically. So I would get one guy and then, wait a little while and get another and then get another. But at the same time, trying to kind of shape the film together into a structure that would be new and compelling and, work at a creative level. So it took a tremendous amount of persistence, as you would expect, and kind of persuasion and weirdness, because a lot of no's, you hit a lot of no's and then you just work it. And some people, they don't do it. I didn't get everyone that I necessarily went after, but the people that I did get, I was incredibly, lucky to get,
How much did your experience on working on the Red Army and then on Genius, the TV show with Nat Geo, help or hinder the way you attack this documentary?
Well, with Red Army, it was the first film, it was the first documentary that I directed myself, and so, that was sort of my, very, very steep learning curve, and, from there, it's different in that I had a lot less footage to work with in this film because these athletes, they only gave me a very small amount of time, so I had to be incredibly efficient and focused with my interviews. It was an exercise in efficiency. What can I do with basically very little? Not like thousands of hours of footage, but actually very, very little. I got about an hour and 20 minutes with each of them.
Wow.
So that was very interesting. And then, with Genius, once the show was shot, we had my brother and I who had basically acquired the rights to the Einstein estate and the Walter Isaacson book. We had very little creative input once Ron Howard and Brian Grazer were involved. We basically had very little creative input. However, that project is incredibly related to In Search of Greatness because, people like Einstein and Picasso, let's talk about Einstein, have the exact same abilities as Wayne Gretzky and Pelé and Jerry Rice, because Einstein was a, out-of-the-box thinker, and he was incredibly creative within his field. He used his imagination. He wasn't the best mathematician, but he was able to kind of reimagine science, and the same thing that these guys do in sports. Einstein himself said that, the universe, you can't, something like you can't understand the universe unless you sort of understand music, right? I think every great athlete, like Muhammad Ali, understood that there's a level of poetry to it. And, without that, you'll never be great, because that's what it is at its essence.
As far as, since you only had that short time of the interview, you obviously have to support it with the footage, and you've got plenty on Gretzky, plenty on Rice. Pele, I think, would be the hardest to find footage, and yet one of my favorite parts of the movie is when you ask him who his favorite kind of person to watch, and you got footage of that athlete.
Yeah.
Was it hardest to find the stuff from Pele's generation?
Yeah, I think, it seems maybe a little bit harder than it is potentially with archival footage because, not everyone's sort of like looking around for random things here and there in their daily life, you know what I'm saying? But if you really are looking for something, it's all out there, somewhere. So, but yeah, it takes a little bit of work, and that's why you have certain people that help out with archival footage, and it's always interesting to look at. The question is, there's so much out there that how do you not spend years just dealing with that and sort of looking through that? So that's...
I've got to ask question-wise, it seemed like they didn't know what you were going to ask them. How much did you stick by your original kind of questions you want to ask them, and how much did you kind of let the conversation gear go wherever it went?
Yeah, I think, like I said before, because I had so little time with them, I couldn't allow the discussion to get too it's not even off track, but just where I knew that this sort of things where I wasn't interested in, you know what I'm saying? If I was bored, basically the whole idea, if something's going to go in my film, it better be surprising or interesting. I get bored very easily, and so if it's in my film, if I ask the question, it means it's something that I think is going to be surprising or interesting. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if I felt like a conversation is sort of getting into boring zone, I will disrupt it and do anything to kind of get up. But sometimes, it leads to something might not lead to, it might not be interesting right then and there, but then it leads somewhere interesting. But yeah, you got to be open.
As far as shooting, your DP is Svetlana, she worked on the Red Army.
Yeah.
How do you guys meld? Because I know, like, before you did docs, when you were like the Motel Life, you were with like Roman.
Yeah.
And he's like David Ayer's guy. Like he's doing crazy stuff.
Well, first he was
your guy.
Alan and Gabe Polsky's guy. Yeah.
How do you work with your DP as far as capturing the shot? And how much input did you let them have? And you've worked with her before now. So.
Yeah. So with documentaries, a little bit tricky because, with feature films, you can compose better. You use lighting in more creative ways. You have more time. You're right, because with documentaries, oftentimes, like especially in this film, like we had to set up really quickly. We had to find the right frame, and because they don't want you to stick around there. You're in and you're out. So the question is, how do you make it dynamic, the frame, and how do you make it beautiful, not sort of just for the sake of beauty, but the appropriate beauty, like that it will enhance the character in some way. So we sort of looked at how to move the camera a little bit, and basically, if you watch the movie, you see sort of ways to keep it dynamic, because at its core, this is, I was faced with a talking heads kind of documentary. So how do you make that dynamic is key but you use it not just with the camera, but with music and graphics and all sorts of tools and stuff like that, sound design.
When you and Alan were growing up, who would you consider your people you look to as the greatest? What people inspired you athletically?
Yeah, I loved, obviously we grew up in Chicago, so Michael Jordan was I mean, he's the greatest in the world, but like, Dennis Savard in Chicago, who was doing amazing things on the ice in football. Again, Jerry Rice, Joe Montana, I was imitating them and trying to do one-handed catches, and Maradona at the time. I remember it's one of my earliest memories. I remember 1986, my dad sort of saying, look at this guy, look at him on television, and seeing kind of he was doing insane things with the soccer ball, that was just so exciting. It's basically people that have that artistry that make it look like amazing performance, something you've never seen,
As far as where this film can go, there's talks about Oscar contention. This seems like it's got legs to it. How long do you decide, okay, now to the next project, and continue with this though? I think
it's key to I think support the film as much as you possibly can when it's coming out, especially this is a message for me that's incredibly personal and important. I want to make sure that I do everything I possibly can for this thing to get people to go to the theaters because I believe in it so much, not just the message, but the quality of filmmaking and what it is. And so that's what drives me as much as possible. Then at a certain point, I'm finishing another film right now, and as I'm taking a little bit of time off to do this, to promote, but at a certain point, okay, it's in theaters, and there's not much else you could do, right? You've already done the press. No one wants to keep talking about the same movie, so you finish that and then move on,
Can we ask what's up next? Are you doing documentary?
Yeah, I'm doing another. I'm finishing another documentary that's currently called Red Penguins, and it's basically about Russia in the 90s and a business deal that happened in the early 90s during this tumultuous period in Russian history. And it's basically kind of like Fargo or Big Lebowski between Americans and Russians in this business deal that is promising that goes crazy and out of control, basically.
A dive back into Russia, like the Red Army.
It's actually about when the Red Army hockey team went bankrupt, and they had to go to the U.S. to basically raise money, and so they got the Pittsburgh Penguins to buy the team for 3 years. So it's a military team that was bankrupt. Imagine if the U.S. Army owned the Yankees and then they went bankrupt and had to go to Russia to go raise the money. The U.S. Army. It's almost inconceivable.
Wow.
Yeah.
One of my favorite parts was, and it kind of ties into Penguins, Gretzky was talking about him and Lemieux. And, he had to kind of decide to let Mario know, when I pass you the ball, shoot. I'm not trying to get the glory here. Was there any moment when you were listening to Gretzky or Jerry or Pele that you were kind of I didn't know that. I didn't know that bit of information about you?
Yeah, I kind of like what I said earlier, where I try not to put anything in the film, in any of my films, where I'm not oh wow, I already know that, or that's not that interesting or new. So anything in the film is things that I was myself, wow, that surprised me. I'm amazed by that. You know what I'm saying? So most of the stuff is things I'd never heard. But yeah, just to give an example, one example is when Gretzky told me basically that he watched, after he played every night, he would watch every game that wasn't his on the NHL, every game after he played, he would watch on TV. But if you think about it, it sounds but if you really think about how much consumption of hockey you have to do, but he loved it, but to watch every game after you play is, to me, mind-boggling. Just to have all of that, imagine in his brain the amount of, but then he went on to say that he remembered every play of every game he's ever played in. I mean, it's almost like inconceivable.
Well, I guess to kind of wrap things up, Gabe, is documentary, you've been bitten by this bug, is that where you want to stay as far as a filmmaker, or do you think you
No, I don't. I'm a guy that basically doesn't want to do the same thing, and, I've made a few, and I think I've done great work, but, let it speak for itself, and I want to do different things, and I will do different things. I'm definitely not going to keep doing the same thing, I'll tell you that. So I think after this next doc, I'll have sort of feel good about what I've produced in that world, and I'm not done with docs, but I'm working on, several, what I think are, fascinating feature films that I've written, and trying to get those made, basically. Financed and made, and I definitely want to make a feature film next. Plus, like, the audience naturally for features seems to be like a lot bigger, and I want to communicate messages, as any filmmaker, to as big of an audience as you can, so
well, I think that's a perfect way to end it. I can't wait to see what's up next. Definitely want to check out the next doc. That sounds crazy.
Yeah, it's going to be really entertaining, and I think really interesting too, So, yeah.
Well, Gabe, thanks for the time, and hope you and your brother keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks. Yeah, appreciate it.